Good afternoon, CX Circle. My name is Gianna Jackson. I lead our revenue team at the Americas.
Good afternoon, CX Circle, and I'm Mehul Nagrani. I'm the Managing Director of the North America business here at InMoment.
We are super grateful for your time today and curiosity in InMoment, most importantly, curiosity in the integrated customer experience story. Mehul, I would love to talk to you a little bit today about what you're seeing in the marketplace around that evolution from asking to listening.
Yeah, Gianna, very germane topic. What we're seeing in the marketplace is something we've been talking about for years is becoming a reality, right? And to frame that up, I want to talk about what inside organizations we find with data. 85% of customer data is unstructured data. But if you look at where most of the industry has been, it's been at a very small sliver of that data actually is truly analyzed and understood to find the customer signals. So you have a lot of customer signal inside organizations that goes untapped. Now, that amount is also growing at 55% a year, right? Lots of those interactions as we have generative AI and chatbots, there are more and more unstructured interactions. And by unstructured, I mean it's text, it's chats, it's voice. Those interactions are increasing. That's making the customer interaction with companies and brands richer, but it's growing this pile of unstructured data at a very fast rate. And we've been talking about an integrated view of that customer, but being able to analyze that much in that many different formats of customer data really requires AI to go from hype to reality. We're now at that point where AI and the capabilities, both in terms of AI to analyze and understand, and increasingly AI to get more sophisticated and create, have gotten to reality from that hype cycle. And that is unlocking this ability to truly understand 100% of the experience data across channels, right? Going from long voice interactions between an agent and a customer in a call center to chats with agents, to chats with virtual chatbots, to emails, to surveys and reviews and other data, right? So that reality possibility is being unlocked by AI, and that is opening up a new way, not to start by asking a customer, but starting with listening to what the customer is already telling you across all those touch points. Those, I'll give you some examples of customers. Those touch points range from tens to hundreds of millions of different interactions across a company. And there is a lot of signal in that already. So you can start with listening. You don't need to start with asking, and you can listen across that customer's journey.
Super fascinating. I think we're seeing a lot of that across customers really needing to democratize those data silos so that they can understand the customer more holistically across the journey beyond digital, as you shared. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of the customer examples that you're seeing and the meaningful outcomes that they're deriving?
Yeah, let me think of a few, right? So one that comes to mind is, a large hotel and casino in Vegas was seeing, coming out of COVID, they were seeing a decline in kind of the customer feedback scores as they ran their NPS programs. And they were seeing that on their website too, in terms of like the engagement. And they couldn't figure out why, right? And so it didn't really tie to the amount of effort. They really believed they were the leaders. They had all sorts of protocols around safety and masking and distancing and disinfecting and cleanliness and all the other things. And they were still seeing those kind of feedback points decline with the customer. What we did is we said, let's look at what else we already know about the customer, right? And so as we added in other channels of listening for that customer, you start seeing a pattern. And from reviews out in social media to calls that were coming into the call center, we started seeing a theme as we turned on more of those channels and analyzed them to find the signal. The reviews would talk about how there was a resort fee, but all the resort amenities were closed, that folks had gone there really ready to be in a world where COVID had gone down. There wasn't a COVID wave, there wasn't kind of that intensity, but the hotels weren't fully open, and the customer expectations and the fees being charged didn't match up to that. And by connecting those different data points, the hotel was able to see one primary finding: customers were there to experience kind of the full Vegas experience. But the hotels, while they were charging for it and talking about it in those terms, the reality was very focused of a year ago when we were deep inside the COVID wave, where a lot of amenities were closed. A lot of it was still not the experience customers had wanted going back to Vegas coming out of COVID. The other thing that we found was expectations had changed, right? Like there was a step change in expectations, and that manifested itself in App Store reviews, right? So you saw that customers who traditionally for that hotel looking back pre-COVID would not have had the same expectations of what that hotel's app could do had come to say, well, why can't I figure this out in the app? Why is this not a feature? And the second finding around that was, and this we're going to talk about over and over, I feel, in the marketplace, expectations are no longer set within a category. If you go to a grocery shop in Whole Foods, you no longer think, well, how's Whole Foods doing relative to Safeway? You think about who's best in class at that experience, and you apply that expectation across the board. We saw that here. It's not like every other Vegas hotel was using the app in very innovative ways, but other retailers, other restaurants, other places were into COVID, mixing that digital and physical journey. And that expectation was set for customers that if I can do it over here, I expect to be able to do it over here, right? And those two findings really helped, one, the hotel think differently about what experience it was providing its customers, but two, to think about the mobile and the app in a very new light and really kind of think about investing in that in a new way, looking at best practices across the industry, not just its competitors, to know what customers really valued in mixing that digital and physical journey.
Fascinating. Thank you for that. I recently heard a CEO say, tell me something I don't know with my data, right? And so I think that's what you're touching on here. Are there another example that you might share?
Yeah, there's a couple of other examples, right? Two examples come to mind. One from the automotive space, and this is where, as you get a large volume of data, what becomes important to be able to do is to separate out volume from impact, right? Like just because something is talked about very often, does that mean that it has the biggest impact? And the answer is often no. And being able to take that vast amount of customer signal, right? Like we're talking about 150 million different interactions in the case of this company. There's a lot of feedback in the automotive sector, as you'd expect, about the interaction in negotiating the price of a car. And, that's not anyone's favorite experience, or very few people's favorite experience. It might be yours, Gianna. You're exceptional at kind of having conversations around value, but that's not always every customer's favorite experience in the car buying journey. And so you hear about it a lot in feedback channels. But is that really what drives the experience? And as you dive into it and try to tie it to impact, what actually moves the needle, what actually gets someone to come into this dealership and say, okay, I would do that again in the end, way more than the negotiation of the price is the 15 minutes they sometimes have to wait before someone goes and has time to interact with them. And that is something that really makes a difference, right? So you see that in terms of frequency way more often, but when you actually tie it to impact across those data sets, you find that that 15-minute wait is really, really a problem, right? And it's also happens to be something that we were able to work with that auto dealership group to fix, which is to say, you know what? This is really easy. Having something that you have some great coffee where you have a receptionist that greets them, takes them to an area. It's an easy fix, but you're able to get to it because you can talk about impact, not just volume of feedback. So that's an example about as you get more data, the types of things you need to get very good at. Impact versus volume is a big one. The other one is you start seeing, decisions that you need to make. You have more pieces tied together. So I'll give you an example from a retailer. This retailer, they are a retailer and a brand. When they would have new product launches, they would see an interesting phenomena that wasn't entirely clear why it was happening, in that their service quality in their call center would go down, and the service interactions about the in-store experience would go down, right? And this was counter to what they believed. The belief was always that when we launch a new product, it creates excitement, it gets people in the door, and it leads to actually a surge of positive kind of customer interactions. This was very counter to what they had come to believe was the reality of new product launches, that they were this big surge of positive customer interactions. And as we dove into bringing in those call center voice calls themselves and understanding why it was, that the interactions were surging and the quality of those interactions was being rated down. And we looked at the feedback from the retail channels in things like social media and review sites. It was a really interesting finding. This goes back to what we had in the first example. Expectations are set universally, not just within your small section. The expectation of inventory, do they have my size? Do they have my color, my size in stock in that store? The customers no longer wanted to go there to see and find out, only to find out that they did not. The expectation from retailers that were doing it really well, linking their in-store inventory to their digital apps and websites, had come to be like, well, I should be able to go open up your app, know my local store, know what the inventory is, and frankly, even reserve it and hold it. And that goes back to the merging of the digital and physical experiences. But you wouldn't have had that insight without being able to unlock all of this unstructured data and the interactions. And what it allowed this company to do is to say, well, linking inventory management systems is expensive, and that's a cross-company decision. But what's the payoff of that decision? They were actually able to see your calls to the call center spiked, asking about inventory at those product launches. Now, that tied up the call center in answering and dealing with other customer service issues at launch. So it actually reduced service quality of the folks that had issues outside of checking inventory. It didn't increase the foot traffic they were used to seeing in this new product launch scenario, because people, for the most part, weren't going in. They were calling. They were not making a trip just to find out, because the expectation from others that were doing this well, especially during COVID, where some companies really got ahead in this space, had been set that that inventory is linked from your digital to your physical, and I can check it, frankly, even reserve it before I go in. And it was having all these downstream effects that when you quantify the value of investing in linking those inventory systems, you could very clearly know the ROI of a decision like that across the customer journey and make an investment that otherwise would have been fragmented and siloed and would have been difficult to justify for that company.
Fantastic stories. Thank you. So if I sort of summarize what I heard you talk about, it's really being able to unpack and understand all of the data across all of those silos, and then really be able to understand, more importantly, what are the meaningful actions a customer can take to realize the right revenue or the right ROI. Measuring something doesn't make it taller, as you've heard me say time and time again.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to take those vast volumes and find the signal, understand and even do what if analyses on the actions, right? Understand what the sum of actions is and do some what if analyses on, if we took this action, what would be the impact on the KPIs that we care about. Really is a very new way of thinking about customer experience, and it's a way that there is still absolutely a space for solicited feedback. Solicited feedback becomes now a more precise tool where it's the only place where you get to ask the customer, okay, what about this are we missing? Or what about this, do you like or not like? But it becomes a tool within all the other places where you can listen to that customer. If you already know something about a customer, you don't have to start by asking them that again. If they're telling you, well, inventory and having that linked is a big deal, you no longer have to ask them, how important is it for you that you're able to see the inventory in the app? They're already telling you that's extremely important. You can ask the next level down question, or you can ask questions about things you cannot learn from listening. It is surprising how much you can learn about that customer from listening when you're truly able to analyze those hundreds of millions of different unstructured interactions with the customer. And that's where the structured data and the unstructured data live side by side, right? Being able to see all of the behaviors on a website in a mobile experience, being able to understand the deep dives within those behaviors and the structured metrics around them, and then being able to probe the unstructured data and layer it on. That combination of the structured behavioral data and the unstructured feedback data gives you a truly complete view of that customer and their journey with your brand and the experience that they have along the way.
Fascinating. Well, Mehul, thank you so much for your time today. To our CX Circle friends, thank you for your time and curiosity as well. In closing, what I'd love the opportunity to extend to you, if interested, is a workshop with your data where we can start to understand some of that data and tell a story with your data and explore whether there's a value and how we might support you going forward. So thank you for your time.
Great chatting with you, Gianna, and CX Circle. Good afternoon again. Great chatting with all of you.
Bye-bye.